We're going to be discussing the idea of the false binary.
What an illusion of choice does, it establishes the baseline assumptions that nobody questions.
This is part of the fifth generation warfare that we've talked about. Voting for the lesser of two evils. It's definitely an emotional, psychological trap that people are in.
You're cheerleading for an insane ideology because you think you're winning.
The role we have as media, how do we help everybody understand this is theater and you need to get back into the real world?
If you're opposed to the agenda, you should oppose it regardless of who's selling it to you.
Welcome to another great panel of the Independent Media Alliance. We have a great conversation set up today, something I'm really excited to talk about that Carrie Wedler brought to the table around stress and the way that it's used to influence our opinions and the way we see the world. And really something that I've talked about a lot over the years in regard to just simply put that emotion circumvents logic, and that power structures will use that idea to keep you in a state of fight or flight. And there's some personal stories to add today that are really going to open your mind to, possibly not just that this is happening, but other ways to deal with this than pharmaceuticals and whatever else is being thrown at us. Before we get into some opening points, let's quickly go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Ryan, Last American Vagabond. Go ahead and we'll start with Kit.
Kit Knightley from offguardian.org.
Hi, I'm Carrie Wedler. I am an independent YouTuber, journalist, content creator, videos. I have a Substack called Pleasure to Burn, and I'm really excited to talk about this today.
My name is Derek Brose with The Conscious Resistance and The Last American Vagabond.
I'm Catherine Austin Fitz with the Solari Report.
Hi, I'm Hakeem Anwar from Above Phone and Take Back Our Tech.
I'm Steve. I host AM Wake Up and Slow News Day.
Outstanding. Well, let's get into this. I'm going to open with a point that Carrie wrote in her Substack, which I think is really a good way to start this. And I'll throw to her on kind of setting the table for what this conversation will be. And I'll bring up the Substack. And by the way, you guys should check out her Substack and support it. Some really great work here. Really just the basic idea that from the way I'm seeing this, and there's plenty more directions we can go in. She writes, when the brain survival mechanism is activated, it physically draws blood away from the frontal lobes, including the prefrontal cortex. This is the brain's highest functioning region. Among many other responsibilities, the prefrontal cortex plays a key role in rational decision-making, concentration, complex learning, and reasoning. This region is the brain most resembles the concept of the mind. When the fight or flight response is activated, this part of the brain is understandably turned down as the more primitive instinctual regions take over. This makes sense if you're running from a tiger, not if you're navigating complex political issues, choosing which lesser evil to rule over you, or watching stressful events on social media and television. Chronic activation of the stress response can have significant health consequences, affecting nearly all systems in the body over time. Stress-linked conditions include well-known ones like cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, and digestive dysfunction. Just really interesting to think about the reality that simply being stressed out in a constant long-term way can cause damn near everything we're seeing today. And maybe not injections are the answer. So thanks for being here today. Let's throw it to Carrie to get us started on her thoughts on that.
Hi, yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this. I wanted to give a little bit of background on how I ended up going down this rabbit hole, which is that in 2019, after an extremely stressful week or two in my life, there were all kinds of emotional issues, childhood issues coming up. At the end of the week, I felt like my whole body was glitching out. It felt like there was like electricity running through my body. And at the end of that week, I started getting really itchy. My skin started flaring up with eczema. And I didn't think much of it because I had eczema as a child. I've had it on and off throughout my life. So I just figured, okay, I'll wait for it to go away. It did not go away. And in fact, the more stress came into my life, the sicker I got. And it went beyond skin issues to an entire systemic chronic illness that I struggled with for about 4.5 years before I found a program rooted in neuroscience and neuroplasticity to heal from a glitched out fight or flight response. And I was dealing with chronic migraines and they were getting so bad, like my fingers were going numb, my mouth was going numb, I couldn't see. And it was starting to get pretty disconcerting. It was virtually every system in my body was malfunctioning. And it was sort of like a frog boiling in water. It started with skin. I didn't think much of it. I was still functional. I wasn't bedridden. But by the time I came to this program, I was really starting to get a bit freaked out by how unwell I was. And I found this program that uses neuroplasticity to help rewire your brain, to create new neural pathways to help your brain and your fight or flight, your limbic system, all start to calm down and understand that perhaps it's overreacting. And as I started doing this program and I started realizing how often my heart was racing and my adrenaline was pumping, I started thinking about the work I do, which is I've been making videos and writing articles about everything that we care about at the Independent Media Alliance for over a decade now. And I was actually very reactive for the majority of the content I was creating. You can go back and watch my old videos and you can see it in my face. I'm just so activated. But I started thinking on a broader scale of, well, okay, if I'm this stressed out and I don't even buy the propaganda, what's going on with people who are completely indoctrinated into the system, which runs so much on fear and keeping people in a state of uncertainty and anxiety? And that's when I started looking into studies on the effects of chronic stress on the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and it started coming together for me. And I don't claim to have every single answer on this. I want to make that really clear, but it's become a real passion for me to understand how this factors into so much of the chaos we see in the world today.
Yeah, and the one thing that stood out to me with what we were briefly talking about before is the idea of, as you framed it, being kind of stuck in fight or flight, right? And this kind of long-term manipulative, whether that was always the design of, as you write about, like, using fear to control people, or just how it was like the happy byproduct of where they ended up. It's clear that this is something that is a massive problem. And my opinion is it's being treat is not even the right term. They're claiming to treat it with pharmaceuticals, and many, in some cases, may in fact suppress the immediate visual problem, but don't actually solve that problem. And then we just go through these cycles of continuing to be there. And, I guess I wonder out loud to the group, is this something that has been by design, to keep us in this, not just the fear, but like the actual chemical side of it from a scientific level, and, all the different ways this can go with children, with the shows they're watching and how it trains them, and whether, what is it like to live an entire life stuck in that? Anyway, just whoever wants to jump in, I think this is a really interesting conversation.
I'll jump in real quick. Thanks for sharing that, Carrie. I think this is really timely. Hopefully everybody who's going to be hearing this will understand the value and the importance of it. Because sometimes I think, even as part of what you're describing there, that because people have become addicted to the constant news cycle or whatever, whether it's something bad about the person they hate or something to celebrate the person they love, obviously Trump is a big part of that. If it's not related to that, people will tune it out, right? So because this doesn't have Epstein in the title, there might be some people who are like, this isn't relevant, because they become addicted to that constant news cycle of just like the dopamine response, the cortisol, all the stuff that goes along with that you were describing. And I was just thinking about this even with myself this morning before we were doing this, because I don't know about you guys, but every now and then I get sucked down the rabbit hole of debating idiots on Twitter or elsewhere. And, that's a great thing for all of our mental health. Of course, it does a great job of keeping us balanced. But in all seriousness, I find myself in that. And I started thinking, like, and I've tried this over the years and I need to get better at it, but how detrimental that is to my mental health to get sucked into that, because not only is it not productive and I have 10 projects I'd love to be working on instead, then I realize, oh my God, I just spent 2 hours checking Facebook or Twitter and going back and forth with people, and not really in any sort of substantial way where we're learning from each other, which is the best case scenario, but where it's just like, yeah, you're a moron. Okay, you're an idiot. And just, I'm like, why am I giving into this? Right. And just how that has already shaped my mental state. I mean, I've been doing this work now for 15 years. So 2009, 2010, that's when I joined Facebook and started posting stuff about conspiracy theories. Right. And it was nowhere near to the level it is now. Not only my ability to reach people and interact with people, but the engagement with these topics. So back then I was sort of shouting into the abyss and nobody was listening. Now these topics are everywhere, especially on Twitter. And so there's a million different opinions coming from all directions to tell you that you're either right and sort of reinforce that dopamine. Yes, I'm correct. Look at me, my ego. Or to tell you you're an idiot and you're wrong, and just to kind of mess with you that way. So yeah, it's something that I definitely feel more and more personally, that even those of us in the independent media, especially those of us who are trying to be influencers or leaders or thought leaders or whatever you want to say, that if we're all messed up in our mental state, like, how do we expect the people who are following our work or casually listening to not be that pulled? And maybe some of them are better off than us because we're so deep. We're like so deep into it. And some people, maybe they just tune into a podcast once a week, right? And they're not as online 24/7 like some of us. But I definitely see how this has impacted my own mental state. And I often wonder, like, how much of my own self has gotten addicted to the need to debate people and argue with people, because I don't enjoy it, but then I find myself going back and doing it.
I do enjoy a little bit of verbal sparring. I do. I think it's fun. I think it's a good intellectual exercise for me to hone my arguments better. This may come as a shock to some of you, but I have previously been a combative type of individual, and it's not so much that I like the arguing with an idiot online thing. That sure, whatever. We've all fallen victim to that once or twice, but I do think that a very important component to all of this is something that I call dumping my brain out, which is something that I try to do every night, where I'll just check out completely from everything that's been going on. Like my girl and I will watch a movie, or I'll read. I like the Terry Pratchett Discworld series for dumping my brain out, because it's just, a complete fictional reality that doesn't really get into the political too much, and it's just a fun way to check out. And I think as long as you maintain some sort of balance that way, you can still, I guess, get in the pit, as it were. And mosh pit rules apply to internet debates too. You just elbows out, knees up, keep moving, and somebody falls down, pick them up.
I think it's an innate part of how humans work, is we tend to respond better to something that's emotionally instigating. And so, big media already knows this. They've been doing it for years. It's crisis after crisis. And so that'll keep someone plugged in on the couch, just tuning in to whatever happens next. And of course, now it's gone season 6 of Clown World, where there's a new twist ending every week, it seems like. So they've really mastered the craft at keeping you pulled in and looking for their next move. But one of the problems that I have with independent media, and really this larger space, is that now individual content creators, they know that fear gets clicks and fear gets engagement. So we've really gotten away from the essence of objective journalism and really just talking about things for what is the most emotional impact that I can make. Well, how can I twist this headline? And so a lot of the conversations that are happening on the internet aren't happening in good faith. There's a lot of people that I would call out that are just using fear to spread their message, instead of one that's balanced and with hope. And through IMA and through events like the People's Reset, there's always trying to keep that hope at the table, which isn't as exciting as the world is doomed. But that's what we need to do as content creators. And as people have shared, as being personally embroiled in it. Yeah, it's like when I started writing, I was like, how do you guys do this stuff? Because it keeps coming out week after week, and you really need to disconnect. You really need to disconnect and dump everything out of your brain. So yeah, I appreciate what you guys have shared and what Steve has said too. And I think that when people are absorbing content, this occurred to me the other day. Have we ever asked ourselves why we are even watching the information that we're watching? Is it just entertainment? Are we trying to inform ourselves? What are we really searching for? Because I think a lot of people are addicted to that fear. And so they just keep doing the same thing they always have, even though they can't do too much about 90% of the things that are going on in the world.
One quick point to add to that, Akeem, which is really interesting. I completely agree. We've gotten to an interesting point, though, where I think we all can all acknowledge that it is pretty serious right now, right? So we are at a point where it is like, oh my gosh, that this might well be the end of certain society. But I agree, though, we shouldn't. It's about factual reporting around it, where there are people that are, hair on fire screaming about every problem, and they've been doing that back when it wasn't this crazy, right? So it's still this interesting, but now you've got that overlap, which makes it even more difficult. But excellent points to include in all that.
I would, to jump on the back of that, I would say there is a difference between engaging very much with real problems that should cause you to be concerned, and being pulled into the white noise of entirely made up scare problems. Derek said that it might be different for us from normal people, and I would say absolutely it's different. It's worse. It's a grandiose comparison, but it's like comparing normal people living in Ukraine to those people working around Chernobyl trying to clear up the site. We get exposed to more by choice, and it does put us at a greater risk for that kind of thing. And that the difficulty is in differentiating things that do genuinely require attention and things that are designed simply to make you afraid or make you feel powerless and that kind of thing.
Carrie, did you, in your work, have you looked at what are the tactics that have been in recent times most effective at moving people into fight or flight? What are the tactics? What are the effective tactics we're dealing with?
You know, I love that question because I was just talking to Ryan about this, and I'm going to quote, right, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with Edward Bernays. He's kind of the father of American propaganda. And in his book, Crystallizing Public Opinion, which he wrote in 1923, he cites the basic human emotions, and he's referring to a psychologist of the time named William McDougall. But I'll just read this little bit. He says, the Public Relations Counsel extracts from his client's ideas which will capitalize certain fundamental instincts in the people he is trying to reach, and then sets about to project those ideas to his public. William McDougall, the psychologist, classifies 7 primary instincts with their attendant emotions. They are flight, fear, repulsion, disgust, curiosity, wonder, pugnacity, anger, self-display, elation. It goes on and on, but the key here for me was the fight or flight. And the next paragraph says, the action of public health officials in stressing the possibility of a plague or epidemic is effective because it appeals to the emotion of fear and presents the possibility of preventing the spread of the epidemic or plague. So this is 1923, which I think it's crazy to go back and read that now. But I think it comes down to a survival mechanism. It gets people to really fear for their physical safety. If you look at what's coming, whether it was COVID or you look at the conversations now, the narratives around immigration and sending in the Marines to Los Angeles, it all is very much about life or death. Everything is such a heightened response. And I think when you can get people into that frame of mind, or rather lack of frame of mind, because you're getting them into more primitive centers, as long as you can get them into that survival mode, I think there's a much greater possibility that they're going to be compliant and they're going to do whatever they can to not have to feel that way anymore. It's a basic human survival instinct to want to survive. And if people are constantly being told that their lives and livelihoods and like the core of their identity, the civilization, the society, they're all at risk, I think that's a good indication that they may end up getting caught in that response.
A good thing to go to, and Derek, if you want to talk on this is your article for TLAV. This is a really interesting overlap to, I mean, just don't lose that point. She's talking about Bernays highlighting exactly the logic of why these things apply and why we saw that through COVID-19 and many others. The rise of authoritarianism, excuse me, Derek wrote this, From Parasite Stress Theory to Lockstep. It's 1-part and 2-part series. This is the first one. Multiple studies predicted governments become authoritarian in response to pandemics. And I'll include the studies that go along with this as well. Just argument, the point being that, oh, go ahead, Derek, you want to explain it? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll just add on that because I think Catherine had some more, but that's what came to mind when Carrie was speaking about Bernays, specifically with the mentioning of the plague. Those studies, which go back to the 70s, show that people that when they studied different responses from people, groups of populations in response to famine, to war, the threat of a pandemic, et cetera, they studied like 6 different scenarios, and they found that threats of pandemics had a very specific, unique response to it. And they'd even said in the studies, even if it wasn't a real threat, even if it was an imagined threat, that the people would become more obedient and governments would become more authoritarian. But I think that, for me, the whole thing, and to add to where I think Catherine, is pointing to, is that it's the fear of the unknown. I think that's another big thing, besides like Carrie saying life or death situations, but also just the fear of the unknown. That's why so many people in our audiences constantly are theorizing about what might happen or what this might mean or who's a shill or who's controlled opposition, because they're afraid of what's lurking around the corner, of what they don't know and what might, come up and bite them. And I think that goes back to Carrie's original point about the brain being overactive. And sure, if we had saber-toothed tigers back in the day to be worried about, the brain had a job to play. Now it's just become people constantly afraid of conspiracies, which obviously are real things, not all of them obviously, but do exist. And so people are constantly just in this fight or flight, a phase because of the fear of the unknown, as well as just being constantly told that civil war is around the corner, World War III. I mean, and I do blame a lot of people in independent and alternative media for that.
So I wanted to tell you about, has anybody here read or studied William Tiller? So Carrie, this is somebody you might want to look into. So Tiller was the head of material sciences at Stanford, and he was able to raise money to do private research on the ability of human intention to change material reality, including at great distances. And he was able to prove that it did. And so I had him on the Solari report. And I was doing the pre-interview, and I asked him what he thought of community prayer. And he said, well, you have to be really careful. He said, if the people doing the praying are coherent, it helps. But if they're incoherent, it harms. It can make things worse. And I realized when he said it, oh, I need to organize my life so I can be more coherent. And so I started to look at the kind of tactics you're talking about and what they did to our sense of coherence. And what I've seen is things will be done that cause us to feel incoherent, and then we will do anything to try and get back to a state of coherence. And what is often offered is sort of a fake coherence, almost as a salve, if you will. And so part of the tactics somehow relate, I think, to coherence and incoherence and trying to keep people in a state of incoherence.
What's actually quite funny about that, it just pulls us back around to what Steve was talking about before, because I don't know how many of you have read the Discworld novels, but the two best, in my opinion, one called The Hogfather and one called Small Gods, and both deal with the idea that human belief shapes human reality. Basically, the gods exist if people believe they exist, and I think, I'm not sure I would subscribe to that, but it does put an awful lot of interesting things into discussion about what the purpose of propaganda is and the power of convincing people of things that aren't true.
Well, and I've often referred to prayer as a direct energy weapon. And well, it's energy focused to the concentrated, in a concentrated manner for a specific outcome. And I would agree with the concept that chaotic or perhaps like prayers of desperation could backfire very, very easily. There are you guys familiar with the Maharishi effect? Where if you get like 1% of a prison population meditating, or 1% of a population meditating, then it has like a ripple effect outward. And they've done experiments in prisons where they've taught meditation classes, and then overall violence in the prison goes down as a result. It's kind of the same general philosophy behind it, because you really are, pushing out concentrated energy with a intended outcome in a very, very direct manner. And it's something that I think people don't take seriously, and probably should put a little bit of study into it before you really try to implement it as a practice.
Well, what's interesting though is you can look at it from two different ways, right? One side of it is more of the esoteric, like, is there, the directed intention and what that can do in more of a, I guess, spiritual sense or energy sense. But then on the other side of it is like the scientific, like, what does that do to your body from a chemical sense? And like this, that's a good point to bring this in, actually, for those that don't know about what these chemicals are. So we're talking about cortisol, right? We're talking about the idea of fight or flight. That's cortisol. That's what gives you that. And so, to the point that Carrie is making, when that happens, your hair stops growing, your immune system shuts down. It's meant to be that moment of survival, so everything ceases. But we're talking a good remember, it's EDSO, EDSO. It stands for endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, where endorphins are pain relief, happiness, dopamine reward, accomplishing something, satisfaction of achieving goals. Serotonin is pride and social bonding, whereas oxytocin they call the love hormone. It's interesting to think about that, because what we're talking about is the idea of the negative side of what these things can do. And these are two different ways to look at it, because I agree with Steve that there's other angles to it as well. But what does the idea of the propaganda for me, and what we're highlighting, I think, is more about the social manipulation through these things of the propaganda and putting you into that state, right? But I mean, what do you think more on that, Steve, in regard to the more the esoteric side?
I mean, there's so many different depths to it, and at some point you kind of do just become like, this is where you get into like the astral projection elements of it, and ways that you can physically travel without necessarily leaving your house. And I think that, again, this is incredibly serious stuff, and I don't think that people should approach it haphazardly or without an extreme amount of veneration for the thing that they're about to participate in. because of the further down that road you go, like like with anything, you know, the rewards can become greater, but so do the risks, and your ability to catch an ego about it and then have that become what you're practicing rather than the practice being the thing that you're practicing is right there. So I would just I would advise not necessarily like caution per se, but respect, a healthy dose of respect.
If I could add on to that, I mean, I think it's a famous knowledge about the placebo effect. When you compare the placebo effect in many, many different studies, they find that placebo has about a 30% efficacy. And so it really goes back to, you tell people they're sick and they believe it. So this belief, the intention has a massive power that we don't understand yet. And going back to the whole, there's people in physics, they talk about scalar waves, which is how it's really the energy of consciousness and that information that can be transmitted, which scalar waves are faster than light. And they can go through everything. So that might be one way to explain how there's this interhuman interaction. But the question I'd like to pose is that if it was just as simple as intention, could we change our reporting to have more to be able to look at the bright side and always be pointing in that direction, pushing towards positive news? Would it actually push the needle in people's mental and spiritual well-being? I think that's interesting to think about.
I would love to add on a couple of thoughts here because I love everything you guys are saying. First, Akeem, to what you mentioned, it made me think of the study that there's a great documentary called The Brain That Changes Itself. It's free on YouTube. It's about 55 minutes. It's about neuroplasticity. And they mention a study, and I've read about it in the guy's book as well, where they took people and had them sit at a piano and practice playing piano with their hands. And then they took another group of people and they just had them sit at the piano and they had them visualize the same thing that the people who are actually using their hands were doing. And at the end of, I think, a week or some period of time, they found that the people who just imagined playing the piano, who didn't actually use their hands, they were playing almost as well. They had seen almost as much of improvement as the people who were physically practicing. So to me, that really illustrates the power of our brains, of our minds, of what's possible. And just one other thought, because I think there's so much to talk about, but speaking of this as a spiritual practice, I wanted to come back to my brain rewiring program. I have done one called the Dynamic Neural Retraining System. And it's funny because I came to it of like, I can't be sick anymore. I've tried everything, nothing's working. And I just came to it for physical benefits. But what I have found in doing this practice is that it's deeply spiritual. And most of it is visualization. It's teaching your brain and creating new associations to help calm the fight or flight. And it's almost entirely visualization. And it's also a practice throughout the day of, say, I had all these food sensitivities and garlic was a really bad one for me. And something they teach in the program is you have to catch yourself every time you have a negative thought about garlic. You have to catch those thoughts and reroute them to something more positive. And as it happens, it works. I was down to eating, I'll save that for when I give a full conversation about what I did, but I was barely able to eat anything without having really severe eczema responses. And now I'm eating almost everything again. I have maybe a few foods left to rewire, but it really comes down to the pathways I'm creating in my brain. And that sounds really scientific, but for me, it's become so spiritual because once I quiet that down and once I can reconnect to earth and source, it's been one of the most enlightening experiences of my life. And it's so much more than the physical, which has improved so much. Almost every symptom I had is gone.
Do you think, go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of step in there where Carrie was going and comment on some of the other threads there. Specifically, and this is to everybody, but Carrie, since this was sort of your initial thought to get this panel going, I mean, I know you're somebody like myself and probably everybody here who believes strongly in personal responsibility. And we're going to have people listening to this who are maybe excited or interested in these ideas. What comes to mind for me is, so the personal responsibility side, on one side, it's us. How do we as journalists, content creators, not just feed into the constant negative news cycle while at the same time trying to do our job of educate people and, spread awareness and things like that. So I think that's one thing, like for each of us and everybody who's a part of the IMA or anybody else out there who's listening to, who puts out podcasts and content, like how can you make sure you're not just feeding into that and following just the latest trend or outrage of the day or of the week, right? That's one thing. But then also to put it back on the audience as far as personal responsibility goes. And you were sort of touching on this with some of the things you've done, but I was just going to pose the question to you and everybody else, like what sort of ideas come to mind for you, that things that people can actually do? Because we've sort of hinted at some things, the program that you've followed, we've talked about meditation and group prayer and things of that sort. But I think ultimately it does come back to the individual, because there will be some people who hear this that will say, this is a bunch of woo-woo hippie stuff. The globalists are trying to kill us. You know, why are we not out there hanging them from the closest tree or pulling out the guillotines? And focused on that, and not so much seeing the role that their own mind and their own heart and their own kind of place of being is playing in the whole grand scheme of things. So yeah, what do you think about that in terms of personal responsibility?
Oh, we can do both. I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah,
we can do both.
You know, it's interesting because I'm coming at it from a perspective of I was actually ill. Like I was so stressed that my body had become like a battleground of just constant survival mode. And so for me, I had to do something a bit more extreme. I had been doing yoga and meditation for over a decade. When I got sick, like that was, or maybe not over a decade, at that point, been maybe 7-8 years, but now I've been doing these things for over a decade. And for me, unfortunately, it was not enough. But this program was. So if you're someone who's really, really struggling, whether with physical health issues or anxiety, which was also a big factor for me, maybe something like rewiring your brain is essential, and maybe it would really help. But another book I read that's so simple, it's called Hardwiring Happiness, and it's also rooted in principles of neuroplasticity, but it's all about little steps throughout the day, maybe 5-10 seconds at a time, to just pause and find something positive in your experience. It could literally be like, I'm sitting on my couch right now and it's really comfortable. And I appreciate that. And I just stop and I soak it in. I have flowers sitting right in front of me. You can't see them on camera. And that brings joy. And it sounds silly. And again, I can understand, I can imagine people commenting if I tweeted this, you know, just, oh, this is so stupid. I have better things to do. Like you said, the globalists were taking over. But if we're going to accept the premise that all of these individual thoughts and actions really add up to a collective consciousness, the more we can do to, and this speaks to what you were saying, Hakeem, about sort of rewiring for more positivity and not to fixate on the negative, because the negativity bias is inborn into the brain. This is something that helped us survive. I think it's actually in this book, Hardwiring Happiness, he talks about like, well, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you hear something behind a bush, you could either assume it's a tiger or you could assume it's the wind. It's probably safer to assume it's the tiger, because if you assume it's the wind and it's a tiger, you're going to die. And so it's really a natural survival mechanism, but we don't have to live like that in this day and age anymore. And so much of this overreaction is just a knee-jerk response from the brain trying to protect us, which I appreciate that. I talk to my limbic system a lot. That's also part of my program. It's just like, hey, thank you. I see you want to help. I got this. Like just stepping in and taking that personal responsibility to be a container for and be able to hold space for so much stress in this world, because it's overwhelming. And whether it's by design or which I kind of lean that way, at least the people who were aware of it. I also think a lot of people believe it themselves. I think a lot of the reporting during COVID, a lot of that was stress from the people writing the stories because they believed it. I don't think it was all just manipulation. But I think there's a lot to be said for becoming really aware of what's going on in your mind and your thoughts, and gently and lovingly helping turn more toward all of the beauty in this world and all of the possibility and all of the people who are doing great things, because there's so much. And it's so easy to get mired in that fear, both because of the top-down propaganda and because of our natural wiring in our brains. So I just think that becoming aware of that and learning more about it. Again, the book is called Hardwiring Happiness. Let me get the guy's name. Let's see, Hardwiring Happiness, Rick Hansen. And a lot of it's rooted in like Buddhism and, oh, you got it, amazing. And meditation and a moment-to-moment awareness of where our thoughts are going and how that can affect the physical world.
It's interesting though.
I mean, I would
please go ahead, Kit. Go ahead.
Regarding whether or not it's real, I think the numerology argument applies. I don't believe in numerology. Unfortunately, there is evidence that suggests some people in quite important positions of power do believe in numerology. So you have to at least understand it and understand that they consider it to be a real thing. Is prayer and manifestation definitely real? I don't think it's been proved so. It could be. But if positive thinking wasn't important, they wouldn't try to stop you doing it. Like, they wouldn't need to fill the airwaves with things to scare you if you not being scared wasn't a good thing for you and a bad thing for them.
But
And
see, here's what's interesting to add to the overlap to it, though, is that both these things are important. Like for those out there listening who, like Derek said, who may hear more of the side of this that they think is more esoteric, more unprovable, both of these things are important in the conversation, right? The actual scientific reality of just pumping you full of fear and how that chemically changes the way you see things and your choices, but also the deeper part of that, which I also agree with. I think there's much more to this story that we don't want to hear, which I was going to ask you, Carrie, about that very point in your treatment. So do you think that this was the treatment solving the stress and that's what helped it, or simply the rewiring that circumvented that stress? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like the difference between the actual physical, or, the esoteric. How do you see that in the way you went through it?
Well, for me, it's coming to this realization that our bodies are so intuitive and wise, and that all I had to do was remove the dysfunction, and my body is just doing its job. Like coming back online, like everything has just been functioning so much better now. And I guess I consider it like the treatment is the rewiring, but I did not take anything. I actually stopped taking any supplements because I wanted to really know if this was working. And the first week my migraine stopped. That was the first symptom to go away. The only migraine I have had since doing this program was the day after the election, because I was not mindful and I was on social media all night and I was checking the news. I wanted to see what's going on. And I woke up, I threw up the next morning. I was in bed all day and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe this used to be my reality. This was 3 times a week I was this sick. And that came just from even just like at that point, 1 week into the program, because it's a minimum 6 months to properly build new neural pathways. But 1 week into the program, even just the belief of like, oh my God, this is so what's been going on with me. And I know that this is going to help. It's this intuitive knowing, like when you've gone through this and then you do a program like what I did and you hear the way it's described, it hits so hard. You're like, oh, no wonder nothing else worked. I've been a glitched out mess in my brain. And it was going on much longer than that. The last 5 years, it was something I think had followed me my whole life, but finally came to a head and then got really bad because I had been in good health my whole life, but I had the eczema. I had a brain tumor when I was 17 or 18. It was benign, came out of nowhere. No one knew why. All these little things. Migraine started at 13, and then I sort of went off the deep end and everything it was like no going back, except there is going back because I just had to create new neural pathways in my brain. And I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but
you did.
Okay, cool.
I mean, it shows either one of two things, right? It either that this is just positive thinking and part placebo that solves it in of itself, or that you can literally circumvent all the nonsense we're being told selves, that, just by removing the stress from your life and rewiring. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think that's powerful to think about.
And it's physically, I mean, you're literally physically reducing the cortisol. You're reducing the adrenaline. You're slowing your body's knee-jerk response to that. A lot of it has to do with a dysfunctional vagus nerve. So there are real physical aspects to what's changing. But what's amazing is that you trigger these physical changes through your mind and through your visualization. And so much of it is, I don't want to give too much away because it's a very in-depth program, but so much of the program, you do an hour a day of active rewiring. And you start the round, I do 3 or 4 rounds a day. You start the round by visualizing the trigger, whether it's something that gives me anxiety. Sometimes it's posting videos. That's what I've had to work on a lot because I get really stressed out. Or whether it's visualizing a food, and you can feel the reaction. Like I can feel my chest gripping, and then you go into the round and you start interrupting that reaction. And then you visualize that trigger as a positive. So you kind of tuck it into one of your positive visualizations. So I'm like out in the redwoods and I'm with the earth and I'm hugging the trees. And then there's something with garlic in it just for me in the forest, and I eat it. And it sounds so silly, but it truly works because you're teaching your brain like, no, this is actually a good thing. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to have a whole life or death reaction to it. And it's been so beautiful for me. And really, I probably wouldn't have believed it. If you have told me this 2 or 3 years ago, I was so caught in my illness and what was wrong and how I couldn't get better. And it's funny and it's a little bit ironic because that was perpetuating my illness, is this belief that I couldn't get better and that everything was going to make me sick and all these foods were dangerous and I was going to get a migraine. And it was changing my mind.
So Carrie, I have to mention, I and some of the people who work for me were in a very stressful situation many years ago, and there was legal stress and danger, financial stress and danger, and physical harassment and danger. And what would happen is something terrible would happen, and it would put us in such a state that we literally couldn't think of how to imagine our way out. And so we created something called a beauty tool. And the beauty tool was a list. It was several pages long, and it was a list of all the things we could do for ourselves to make ourselves feel good or spoil ourselves that didn't cost a lot of money. It had to be highly economic because there was a lot of financial stress. And what we discovered is when we would get put in a stress corner, we would pull out the beauty tool, and we literally couldn't think of these things if we hadn't had a written list because we were so stressed out. But we could pull out the tool and then say, okay, let's do these too. And it would work to get us out.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's so beautiful and it's so simple. You know, I think with so much chronic illness in America, around the world, I think it's so easy to feel like you have to get the medical interventions and you have to do what the doctor says. And in my case, the doctors didn't even know what was wrong with me. They knew I had eczema and I got offered a shot. And one doctor had kind of a good idea to trick my brain into not reacting, but there was no holistic sense of how to fix it. And it feels so big. I was so sick. It was such a mystery. But then you talk about things like this and it's so helpful. And in the moment you feel it, you know that something's changing and you're interrupting something.
Now, have you looked at Joe Dispenza's work and how it compares to what you're talking about?
Not deeply, but he's actually recommended reading in the program I did. So I'm aware of his general philosophy and his approach. And I think it's very much in line with the program I've done.
Well, it's interesting. We could take this into another direction that I'm almost hesitating because I'm going to take it into a negative direction, and we're talking about the positive side of it. But on that note, actually, what I think is interesting is that, I've had this conversation many times over the years where people go like, hey, can't you talk about some of the positive stuff? And my grappling with that is that, okay, I want to be objective and honest. Right. And so me grabbing a positive story to insert it into it feels dishonest because it's not necessarily the biggest and most important. But when I find a large story that I think is in the, I will include that. And sometimes I do try to, if I see it come across my path, but maybe that's me failing to bring it in, so I grapple with that because I agree. And I think it is. But I'm going more towards the idea that we can talk about these negative stories, but as I'll highlight, I think we all do that, this is maybe feeling negative because we're at a point where more people are questioning authority more than ever, that kind of a way. But I'm saying this to kind of segue into the point about things that I think are darker around this, and like I wanted to go to something like neuroweapons, since they're like neuroscience, because that got brought up and Catherine's talked about this in the past and wondering how that might intersect. And I know that you did want to talk at one point about something like long COVID and the overlap to that. So if we can go in any direction, what do you guys want to talk about? Catherine, what do you think?
So I think it's very, during the time we were dealing with significant harassment, and if you look at sort of the whole area of targeted individuals and sort of the tactics they deal with, there is a whole technology from sort of old style. You have psychic warfare, and literally people are paid to are hired to pay to be psychic warriors, all the way to very high tech weapons to put you in a state of stress. So we're not just dealing with propaganda; we're dealing with lots and lots of technology. If you go to Solari, there's a collection called Mind Control. So if you put in Mind Control, you'll pull up we tried to keep all the best links and sort of videos, books. One of my favorite is a very deep dive into the history of the gambling industry, focused on the technologies used to create gambling addictions using slot machines. So it was a professor from both Tufts and MIT, and it's very long, it's very detailed, but what you realize is that if you run down that section, Ryan, you'll find the book. It's really extraordinary, but what you realize is somebody go down to the book section. Yeah, Addiction by Design is the one. You just passed it. Yeah, there it is, Addiction by Design. Remarkable book, but what you realize is an industry has spent literally billions of dollars and decades trying to figure out how to use slot machine software and hardware to create physical addictions. It's extraordinary. And what you realize is we're dealing with, we're up against a very sophisticated high-tech industry. that is using everything from classic propaganda to real high-tech technology and invisible weaponry to get us hooked in this way. And that's why we have to be careful. I just read a new book. We'll write a review for it for the Solari Report called The Tech Exit. And it's by a mother who's basically gotten all of her kids off of technology. And she does a real deep dive on sort of what your kids are exposed to in terms of technology and content. And it's pretty frightening. So we are dealing up against people with massive resources to achieve the goals that you're talking about.
I'm not at Catherine's level yet with the psychic warriors. Right now, I'm dealing with the keyboard warriors. Those guys are annoying, but I think they're only level 3. Now, I just wanted to add to that. Yes, like the technology aspect we were talking about earlier. What are some techniques you could start to use at home to better your health? And I mean, I have a phone company, and yet I would say that carving out time, a significant amount of time away from the phone where it's not in use, is the best thing you could do. Because of all the weapons that they have, it's the phone and the laptop and the social media that are running 24/7. So it makes it so easy to pull you back down into that dark space. And of course, children are targeted more than anyone. There was a recent study published of 100,000 young people who saw that girls who were given a phone under the age of 13, they had double the number of suicidal thoughts than kids who didn't get their phones till later on. So, I mean, with our phone company, we say that we don't recommend giving phones to kids this young. I think I had my first laptop at 11, and that was a little bit too young, I think. And so the more time you can spend away from the devices and away from the anonymous trolls online that bring you down for every positive message you send out will likely be better for you. So maybe the next time you could install an app like Screen Time, which will tell you how much time you've been on the phone, and that'll give you a picture of why your thoughts, your feelings, and emotions are the way they are.
I hate to say it though, that some of those screen time apps are a little invasive, but I agree with the logic of keeping an eye on it. I'll just quickly point out, and I'm not going to give the brand lest you think I'm trying to promote these for my own benefit. Go find something like this, which is a pouch that you put your phone in that completely blacks it out. One pouch actually blocks, like, the radiation still works. The back pouch blocks it and blacks it out entirely. I've got one for my computer, but like I put my phone in this when anytime I'm not working, which actually frustrates a lot of people, but I think it's very important because you just need to disconnect. We shouldn't be slaves to this thing dinging at you every time and jumping to it,
So Ryan, just to let you know, we just started marketing Faraday bags for phones at Solari. Nice. And all allies get a complimentary one. So I put my email address in the chat, and anybody who wants to email me address, I'm happy to send you a complimentary one.
I need to email you anyway because we got to get you on the show.
I wanted to hop in real quick about visualization. I know it's been mentioned a couple times, and actually something that Carrie said as well as Catherine just brought this up for me. So some of you guys know my own story of dealing with drug addiction and depression and suicide attempts at a young age. Like, this is all before my activism. So it's a journey I was on before I even got into the chaos of trying to keep up with the daily news and all the imbalances that can create. And I can just say that for me, when I started to move away from my states of depression and self-doubt and insecurities and all that stuff, that meditation was a powerful tool for me, as was prayer. But visualization, creative visualization, that's a specific phrase there. I think there's even a book called Creative Visualization, was very useful for me. And especially what you were describing, Carrie, in terms of like kind of becoming hyper aware of, which meditation helps with, of your own layers of consciousness. So you talked about like communicating with your limbic system, and that sounds silly to a lot of people and maybe even some folks on this panel. But I do think it's like becoming aware down to that level of like recognizing when you're feeling the tension in your chest or in your jaw or wherever you get it, and then being able to, like you described, communicate with that part of your body or your brain and say, hey, like, I understand why you're doing this. Thanks for the warning or the concern. I'm in control here. And, when you can get down, that to me is like, that's real freedom. That's real liberty. That's cognitive liberty, mental liberty, physical, spiritual. People sometimes just think about being free as like, oh, we want the government to leave us alone, but you can still be a slave in your own mind, of course, and then through that to your own body. So visualization is extremely important, I think, in this this whole conversation. And to that point, Catherine, I was just looking up the interview we did in like 2023. It was the end of 2023, and you were talking about your beauty plan idea. It was something you mentioned then, and maybe you'll remember it because I can't remember the name you gave it. But we were both talking about just the importance of each of us and those at home really spending time, like instead of obsessing over Agenda 2030, focusing on what does your 2030 look like. And I actually wrote an article for TLAV years ago about that, sort of taking that whole idea of you'll own nothing and be happy, and then spinning it on its head and saying, well, what if we all envisioned our 2030? And here's my vision of that. And just kind of spent some time describing that. And you and I, Catherine, back then were just discussing the importance of encouraging people to do that. And I think you said that you and the Solari team sort of have this year-end practice where you guys do that. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so we do backcastings, and we did, the last one we did was with 5 legislators from Idaho, and we did a backcasting of for 2030 for Idaho, where Idaho had made a significant difference in preserving freedom in the state, and it had spread across the country. So it was 2030, and we were prosperous, and Idaho was very successful. And what we did was each person told the story in a different area. Some people took education, some people took health, different topics, and talked about how freedom had been preserved and achieved. In other words, we start with success, and then we tell the story of how that success happened. And the year before, the Solari team had done it just as a team for sort of how freedom ended up winning. So I think backcastings are very helpful to helping you imagine. And
I love that. I love that idea.
yeah.
I think we need more of that for sure.
And still the same kind of point applies, is that, you know, this is something, it's about, like, people may be thinking, oh, you're talking to your body, and maybe that's exactly what you envision, and maybe that's really what it is, but it's the intention, right? It's the idea of putting that out into the world. And, you know, it comes back to this really clear point of just the power that you have with that intention, with your mind, with what we can accomplish in our body. And what I was mentioning before is the point of, you know, kind of reverse with the COVID-19 illusion. And what was discussed on that is showing how the long COVID, we talked about this many times, I think all of us probably, the overlap of the psychosomatic aspect, and showing you how terrible that can be in the other side of it, you know, driving you to this place where you're so consumed with this idea that your body starts shutting down, and it's nothing to do other than the panic and the control, you know, and there were studies that really did break that down. It's just a powerful thing to think about, what you can do with that power of your mind, good or bad.
So I do have to mention, the thing that helped me the most was spiritual warfare training. I had a wonderful church in Washington, and I spent 2.5 years in their Bible Institute studying spiritual warfare. And one of the things they always taught us was to pray for our enemy. And so I literally had people who were trying to kill me. I was constantly dealing with physical harassment or poisoning, but I used to pray for everybody involved. And what was interesting is, when you pray for people, one, you go into a higher mind and you find solutions you would never find if you were in fight or flight. But the other thing is, you understand their point of view, and that intelligence is invaluable if you're trying to stay alive. So I found spiritual warfare techniques to be fantastic. You know, one of the key techniques when you're in fight or flight, and to get out of fight or flight, scripture says he dwells in the midst of our praise. And you go into a state of praise, and you just start giving thanks for anything you can think of. And it's by building that praise that works. I wanted to mention to you, Carrie, I'm going to go into the archives and see if I can find it and dig it out. John Rappaport has the most fantastic imagination series, but imagination exercises. And he has all these exercises that you can use to just, and it's, I think, what you mean when you say neuroplasticity. But one of my favorite is to, as you're driving down the road or you're walking down the street, just start spreading precious gems and diamonds on the rooftops and the trees of all your neighbors, as if you're blessing them. And all I can tell you, it has the most marvelous impact on your attitude. Just, you know, like Johnny Appleseed spreading diamonds and pearls everywhere in your neighborhood.
The history of psychic warfare as regarding the CIA is actually very interesting. It's probably most famous through the men who stare at goats. But it's one of those things that makes the CIA seem both scary and funny, because you know that they spent like a severe amount of money, basically hiring Cubans to sit in a dark room, stare at pictures of Fidel Castro and wish he was dead. And it probably wasn't even the top 50 things they tried that year that were absolutely insane. But it also brings us around to something quite interesting, which is a question I've been asking in my mind for a long time, which is the decline, purposeful decline, of the campaign against religious thinking, especially in the West, for the last 30 years or so, maybe more. Because on the face of it, you would say religion historically has offered an incredible tool for social control through, Catholicism in the West and the Ottoman Empire and that kind of thing. It always has done. And yet there is this surge in not just atheism, but a sort of nihilistic atheism, especially in what you would call like the enlightened and the centrists. And you wonder why that is. And it's because I think what you have with regards to prayer, with regards to religion, is you have basically three possibilities. Either it works because there is a higher spirit and it does mean something. Either it works because the power of human consciousness to manifest things, or it works simply because it makes you feel better. And either way, that is something that the powers that we can't afford to have in people's minds. So it's interesting to see them cut off a potentially useful tool because it supplies calm. And the power of calm, I think, is undervalued.
So, Kit, have you ever read Dr. Robert Temple's book, A New Science of Heaven?
I have it on my bookshelf, but I have not read it. Someone gave it to me.
So what he says, and I believe he's right, is 99% of the universe is made up of plasma, and plasma is alive and intelligent. So I would say one of the reasons it has an influence or it has an impact or it works is because we are dealing, life is alive and it's everywhere. It's intelligent. One of the reasons I think religion works, and one of the reasons I believe it, is religion where you access the proper knowledge and training basically teaches that you have the ability through faith to create your reality. So it's teaching an individual that through their practice, through their good habits, through how they conduct themselves, they can build a successful life, a successful family, a successful world. And they teach them certain practices of how to do that. So scripture says faith is the substance of things hoped for, but not yet seen. And basically what it's teaching you is, it's almost teaching you the same thing you read if you read Ingo Swann, which is part of our reality is concrete and material, but part of our reality is invisible. And we need to believe in it, attend to it, and use it to our advantage. And it's by opening the doorways to those invisible world that it gives you power. And that's one of the reasons I think the powers that be would rather use religion for control or just drive you into atheism, because you lose your power. You lose your, love is your power, and you lose your love without that faith.
Man, I love this conversation. This has been a good one.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. It doesn't come up enough in the the field that we're in. And I make a point in my work in general on the day-to-day stuff to make sure that I'm not crossing the line of my personal religious beliefs with what I'm reporting. But it doesn't mean that it's not monumentally important in my worldview or in any number of ways around how this affects the way we see the world. And I just think it's so fascinating to think about this is like the point you just made, Kit, which is kind of what I was saying a second before about the, regardless of how it actually works, it still works. You know what I mean? Whichever way it's actually working. And, it's just the power of positive thinking in a very simple sense for those out there that are, not religious. But obviously this goes much grander than that in many different ways. Go ahead, Catherine.
So let me ask a question, because, if you look at what each person here is doing, it's extraordinary, because, I can just hear your parents in the background saying, oh, what you're trying to do is such a long shot. It's so hopeless. I don't know why you're doing this. But if you look at each person here is demonstrating a remarkable faith in the possibility of building a human civilization against all odds. Right?
100% agree. And I think that's a profound thing to think about, that that, you know, it comes to that, but also just the fact that we are willing to gamble on this because we believe in this. And I think we can all acknowledge, I mean, Carrie, probably more than most, has suffered a lot of consequences for simply doing what she believes in, or what, you know, what we believe in as a group, as individuals. It's just a powerful thing, you know. And I think on another note that connects to that, I think that's one of the main parts that is shaking people free from everything, because as this gets more ridiculous and more cartoonish, it becomes impossible not to see the difference between people that actually stand with principle and those that just jump to the next story every day, or, as Keem's pointing out, just focus on only the negative, and it's always hyperbolic. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, I just want to add just a brief little thought on that, which is in the program that I do. One of their tips is don't watch the news when you're doing this program. So that was a bit difficult for me. It's like, well, I kind of have to if I want to make my videos and I want to talk about it. But I went quite a while when I first started the program. I didn't really post anything. I was very quiet because I do get activated, and now I have better tools and better inner resources and just an overall calmer system. So I feel okay doing it. But I think it's so telling. This is, you know, I wouldn't say that the program is necessarily like, I don't think the people who created it share our beliefs. You know, they're wonderful people. I'm so grateful for them. But like, I don't know that that they're thinking about volunteerism and you know, the status system. And yet even they're saying like, yeah, you probably don't want to watch the news. This is not good for your healing. And so what does that mean for all of these people who are addicted to the news cycle and constantly consuming all this negativity and confirming their negativity bias? And again, just to stress the importance of, like, yes, it is important to be informed. It's vital, and you should know what's going on in the world. But I think there are limits, and the boundary, I think, should be your well-being.
Well said. Absolutely agree. And let's go ahead and kind of wrap on that amazing note right there, and just, you know, kind of go around, you know, if we give our final thoughts on this. And, you know, I'll start it off with, you know, it's a battle, right? I mean, because what we're describing is almost asking people to not look at our work in a small way. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like this battle. So it's really, it's each of us in our individual fight in all of this. And like she said, of course, you have to be informed. I mean, I think that's important, and I don't want to say then just listen to the people you trust, because that's the exact opposite of what I want you to do. Go and look at many sources and consider these thoughts. But I agree with Carrie entirely. It comes down to your well-being, health, and emotional, spiritual, and otherwise. That has to be the most important. And, you know, but nonetheless, if you don't have the time to dig into all these things, just remain objective and consider all possibilities that are in front of you, and don't fall into the emotional, you know, merry-go-round that just never stops, because that's the most important, I think, to this conversation, is don't get trapped in that never-ending cycle of cortisol pumping fight or flight, because you will get lost in it, as Carrie's highlighting today. So great conversation. I agree, Derek. I'm glad we had this one, and we should focus on it again in the future.
I'll just add to that. It's time for us to be freedom lovers, because there's nothing that we need to fight for. And everyone on this call is a perfect example of that. And I hope that with just the shift in mindset and the shift in intention, that we can bubble this flow of positivity out to more people. I try and add a positive story to every show I do on the T-Bot show, which is on Substack, tbot.substack.com. And I think it's really important, because these positive stories, they could be the things that change the world. But if we aren't the one,
well, of course that happens. I'll give him an opportunity to, is he going to jump back in? All right. Well, why don't we jump to whoever's next?
I would say one thing we could do is just, we had a wide-ranging and like fairly high concept discussion. I think if we went around and just said one practical thing we do, like one practical thing we consider to be the most important thing to do to maintain positivity, I think that would be a nice way to wrap up. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm going to go first, or if anybody even agrees with me, but like,
Go for it, Kit.
Go for it. Start it
okay,
off.
well, just as a story, I would say animals are very important. In late 2021, height of COVID, a stray cat just wandered into my yard one day, and he now lives here. And I would say he had such a massive impact on the way I run the website and the way I think about the world. And like, he is a grounding influence. Like, animals make you realize what's real and what matters. And when you touch them, you'll feel more grounded in reality, I think. This is kind of going against the positivity grain, but just he disappeared 2 weeks ago, and I haven't been able to find him. And the stark difference in like how the world feels now that he is not around is stark. I used the word already, and I think that is one thing. Like, I would encourage people to get an animal and adopt an animal off the streets that's had a hard time of it. I think that is a very positive thing to do, and it kind of brings you back to reality.
God, I can't second that enough. And I have to say, just on a personal note, Kit, or anybody out there with that same expression, like that says so much about who you are in my mind as a person, and just in every possible way. Because I think animals are, the way people respond and act with them, it says a lot about who they are. Anyway, I agree with that entirely, Kit. Thank you for that. You want to jump in next, Akeem, since you dropped out?
Yeah, that was perfect timing. No,
That's what
I just
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how amazing this panel has been, how awesome it has been to get some tools from everyone here. And now it's really about living in compassion. And this is something I've like struggled with for a long time. For me, it's like seeing the homeless in my hometown. And then there's like, when I'm driving by, there's a struggle, like, all right, stop, talk to them, say hi. But then there's that fear, ego response, which is like, don't do that. You don't know what they're like. They could hurt you. They could rob you, all of these things. And a week ago, I decided to have some courage and be more positive. And so I saw a sign where someone said, I need a cold drink. It's this lady on the side of a road under the underpass. And so I stopped and I parked and I did it. I grabbed some waters. I grabbed some lemonades. I stopped and chatted with every homeless person. And really, if you talk to them, they're trying to change their lives. They're trying to get off the street. And I just love their determination. They're saying, I'm getting off the street. And then when I got to the lady under the underpass, it turns out I start chatting with her. She's been under this underpass. She's been homeless for years. And she's now gotten a grant from the city to paint this entire underpass. And she's painting it in all the colors, and she's representing the other homeless people in the city. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. And so it's like, if you just you have the courage to shift into that positive mindset and put yourself out there, you'll get it all back. So I just wanted to end with that.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Just seconding and thirding everything that's already been said. Kit, yes, definitely on the animals front for sure. I mean, I've recently got a dog for the first time in 20 years after having a traumatic experience, the last dog I had. And he has been very healing as well. All the animals that I've been lucky enough to love. And I'm one that loves animals from dogs to cats to rats. So I love them all. And I see Catherine just shared some videos of cats and dogs. And I don't use Instagram much, but when I do get on Instagram, my entire feed is dog and cat videos. So that's my way of checking out from this stuff. I'm just like, all right, I'm tired of hearing about Trump and whatever else. And Carrie's got Rev there. I would just add, besides animals and what's been shared, and I mentioned earlier about visualization, and I do think visualization is very powerful and it's a great tool. And by that, I mean literally using that powerful imagination you have to visualize, to see, to smell, to taste the things you want to become reality, and putting weight into that. That's one of the tools that I think really just changed my life in so many ways and allowed me to see beyond the circumstances that I was in the past, just being able to imagine that I could be there, and then to see myself living and existing in this place that is now my reality. It made it very real. So I'm grateful for that. And the other thing, just again, back to personal responsibility for everybody listening to that, I've been finding myself increasingly frustrated about this, and I just want to reemphasize it. Stop rewarding the content creators and the podcasters who are feeding you garbage. Stop following them. Stop donating to them. Stop subscribing to them. If every other week they're telling you it's civil war, if every other week they're telling you World War III is about to happen, or whatever is about, just if you have evidence to see, okay, this person's been wrong, and not only they've been wrong, but when I watch their content, I come away feeling worse, and I feel like hopeless. And not just because they're reporting truth, but because they're exaggerating or they're, just embellishing the facts. Stop rewarding them and stop punishing yourself by going back to those places. So that's one thing. Take it into your own hands and don't support those who are putting that sort of energy out there and that kind of content. And then last thing, just for the good of everyone, take care of yourself.
Well, I'll jump in with the Kit's idea of the ending part. I'll just say to add to that. Funny, both you and Derek kind of, at first I was like, the dog thing is exactly where my heart would take me. And then the idea of the, mental, I'm just going to take it another physical point, like a real, like, I often talk about like grounding or going out, putting your feet on the ground, getting outside. But I think we all have a similar thought on that. Gardening is something that I think is profound. And I've always loved that. It's big in my family, and I've just fallen into it this last year. I shared a video earlier, and I have to do an update. It's insane. Half my backyard is overtaken by butternut squash and corn. It's just ridiculous. And I don't have enough. My little yard is not enough size for it. But I recommend something like that. Finding that passion that you can put yourself in. The animal part again. I just can't stress enough, because I really do think that what we're talking about today, it's that power of intention. I think it's just this pure thing that comes from from animals, that it just, unconditional love, and it does change you. It really does. And so I think that's an interesting point to add. And and in general, I think I really appreciate all this, what we're talking about today, for more reasons than just the discussion point of changing the way you view it. I'll include a video that I've watched a long time ago from a person called Simon Sinek. That's where the EDSO thing, that's his little acronym for it. And it's interesting to think about. He titles it, Why Leaders Eat Last. And he really does a great job of bringing it into why the leadership, if you call it that today, is not that. That at one point it was about, them being on the outside, protecting us in the middle. And now it's them in the center, and all of us, the fodder, protecting them. And it comes back to these same kind of ideas and what drives us and how they use them against us. And so it's a really great conversation. Thank you for setting this up, Carrie. And I'll pass it to Catherine.
So I was just going to say one of the things I love is music. And in the most stressful periods in my life, the two things that would always bring me back to coherence were, the first thing was my cousin's cows in the pasture behind my house. I don't know if you've ever gone and talked to a cow, but they'll just look at you like, you just need to calm down and chill. You just way too, they're so, I don't know, they're very placid. So it was the cows. But the other thing was listening to the Goldberg Variations by Bach. So Bach is unbelievably complex, but in a very high mind, and it always sort of pulls you out of the dungeon. A lot of times when I'm working, so when I'm in the Netherlands, we have wonderful flea markets here. And for 10 euros, you can buy the complete works of Vivaldi in CDs, the complete works of Bach, the complete works of Mozart. I've never had so many complete works in my life, thanks to the flea markets. And I've got one of these CD racks that'll play 50 CDs. So I have marvelous music all day long.
Well, I love it. I think this is, definitely a different slice of what we're getting into in our lives. And I think people really enjoy it. So I think we should have more talks like this in general. Anybody have any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I have a couple. Yeah. Oh, no, after you, Catherine.
I just want to see a picture of your butternut squash, because I've had explosive butternut squash. It must be a Tennessee thing. So just remember to send us a picture of your butternut squash. Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
No worries. That's important. I agree with everyone. Music, nature, animals, all of these things are so important. And I wanted to, before I give my last little tip, which I actually already mentioned, but I want to reiterate, I just want to address, my guess is there are going to be some people watching this who go, oh my God, this is so stupid. Well, you're going to change the world with positive thinking. Like I get that. I understand. I think the question I would pose to you is, how does it feel otherwise? Like if you really get connected to your body and you start sensing what it feels like when you're in that negativity and when you're reacting, even if you're completely broken out of all the programming and indoctrination, my guess, I could be wrong, my guess is that you're probably feeling it in your body. You're probably feeling gripping and tension and activation. And I guess the question is, do you like feeling that way? When you become aware of it, does it feel good? And if not, then what I would love to direct you toward, which I mentioned, is this book, Hardwiring Happiness. Because sure, it's a little bit woo-woo and it talks about, Buddhism and everything, but it's also very rooted in neuroscience. So there's a scientific appeal to it as well, that I think if you're skeptical of all the woo-woo stuff, that is a little more grounding and provides a foundation to understand. But it's also it's less daunting than meditation. I think meditation can be scary for people who don't do it. It's still kind of scary for me, and I've been doing it so long. I still kind of avoid it. I'm like, no, it's time, Carrie, we have to meditate. But with this idea of soaking, as he describes in the book, it's like 5-10 seconds at a time. And it's so minor. It's like this water tastes really good. Wow. And I love my dog. She moved. She's so soft. All these little things, whether you're out in nature or you're gardening, just taking the time to pause and enjoy that it can make such a marked difference in your day-to-day experience. And even if you are still following the news, which I think to some extent we should, even if you are taking all that in, I think it's just practical to try to balance that out and come back to being and grounding and connection, as opposed to all the chaos and stress that is constantly pushed on us.
Well said. I think it's a good note to end on, and thank you all for being here today. And I'm looking forward to the next panel. And I'll end with my usual, as always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.